Chapter 17, Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, Siman Yud Zayin, Seif Dalit, Section 4, page 110 in the Mitzuda edition. Says the Kitzur, Shohem me'at ve'omer v'ahavta, v'chein ben parsha zu leparshas v'hoya im shamoa, also yafsik ma'at, and so too v'chein kodem v'yomer yafsik ma'at. That's when it comes to Shema. Shema is made up of three distinct sections. We have the Shema Yisrael, the V'ahavta. We then have the V'hayam Shamoa, and finally Vayomer. Between the first pasuk of Shema Yisrael, Shema Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and the beginning of the next section of V'ahavta, one is to pause only slightly, and so too between V'ahavta and V'haya im Shamoa from Parashas Ekev, also one is to stop briefly, and finally between the end of V'haya im Shamoa and Vayomer, one also is to stop, just as the pause very briefly. Just as an aside, a lot of the older Siddurim, for some reason, the last pasuk of V'haya im Shamoa, the pasuk of L'man Yirbu Yimechem V'mei V'neichem, is presented separately. So that's a complete mistake. There's no reason for that. L'man Yirbu Yimechem V'mei V'neichem Al Ha'adama, etc., is the last pasuk of the V'haya im Shamoa section, and not the beginning of the next section, and not a self-contained section for that matter either. And then says the Kitzur, V'yechavein beparshas Vayomer, when one recites the Vayomer, the last section of the Shema from Parshas Shlach, one should have in mind L'kayem mitzvahs asay zechiras yitzias Mitzrayim. One should have in mind to fulfill the positive daily commandment of remembering the exodus of us leaving Egypt. Chumash tells us, there are many, many commandments that somehow directly relate, either indirectly or directly to the Exodus. The Ramban explains at the end of his commentary to Parshas Bo that for us, Yitzias Mitzrayim, the Exodus, was not simply a watershed event in our history, but rather proved conclusively once and for all that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that God is not simply a Borei, one who created the world, but rather a Manhig, one who continues to monitor and to govern the world very actively as well, to the extent where if even for a moment HaKadosh Baruch Hu would cease to keep, so to speak, his finger on the button and to constantly, every millisecond, recreate and allow for the continuation of the world would instantly revert to Tohu Vavohu. It's for this reason that we say in the Shema, in the Yishtabach, Haboche b'shrei Zimra, Melech Chei Ha'olamim, explains the Rambam in the Sefer Mar Nevuchim, Melech Chei, in the present, the king who continues to maintain constantly and provide life for his world. It's for this reason, explains the Ramban in his commentary to Bo, that we have such a fixation with the Exodus, with the Yitzias Mitzrayim. Were it to simply be a big event, a major event in the formative stages of our nationhood, that would be one thing. But as the Ramban teaches, Yitzias Mitzrayim was the event that absolutely conclusively demonstrated Hashem not only as a creator, but as a manhig as well. And hence, we go out of our way with so many mitzvahs, whether it be sukkah, whether it be matzah, whether it be tefillin, so many mitzvahs that either as a primary reason or a secondary reason relate to Yitzias Mitzrayim. Just because somebody has a question, everybody wakes up, how do you know God created the world? How do you know God continues to monitor the world? So everybody comes up with this great question, thinks they discovered gravity. They're the first ones to think of this. So writes the Ramban, Hashem doesn't have to prove himself to each and every questioner, each and every person who legitimately or not as legitimately decides he wants to question God's existence, or God's active involvement in his world. So Hashem does not have an obligation to prove himself to anybody. As he did it once in a very, very grand fashion, and it's up to us to keep on repeating and reminding ourselves of what he he did all those years ago to teach generation after generation after generation, and thus to answer the question, as God doesn't have to prove himself, it was done, he did it, and it's for us to perpetuate the memory of Yetzias Mitzrayim. So as mentioned, there are lots of specific mitzvahs that either directly or indirectly relate to the Exodus, but beyond that, there's a daily commandment to explicitly make reference to Yetzias Mitzrayim. L'man tizkar es yom tzayischa me'eretz Mitzrayim kol yemei chayecha, to remember Yetzias Mitzrayim each and every day. As you may recall from the Haggadah, there is a dispute as to whether this mitzvah applies only to the morning or even to the night. So we paskin that maskirin Yetzias Mitzrayim baleilos, we make mention of the Exodus both in the morning and in the evening. The Chachomim established the third parsha of